All right, so we're going onward to Louis V, and thus right after will be Hugh Capet already. Now with this particular image, it is showing the Normans and the Normandy invasion, conquest, influence. This is a great map I just found. I want to share it. Yeah, whoever did this is excellent. I don't see any. I guess the claim is on Wikipedia because they did quite a bit of work on it. But right here, a lot of it's going on right here at this time right now, but it looks like they're going to be speeding up to pretty much everywhere. We've got Italy down there as well. They're in discussion of with all those votes, and I imagine they were kind of sketchy in a way, but somehow they made it there. So I could leave this map, or we can go look at a picture of Hugh Capet. That's another idea. I mean, he wasn't really. Let's go check him out. Hugh Capet. Most of the images are all kind of the same. Holding a scepter, and it has, for some reason, a hand on it. His portraits. We don't know what the hand is all about. The hand of God. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Maybe there's some explanation of it. I doubt it. I doubt this book is going to explain that silliness. This is more chronological, you know. This happened then, and this happened that, and you know. So who do we have here? There's some stained glass. Lots and lots of this Hugh Capet fellow. And here he is, the reign and the impact of Hugh. That was a pretty good one in the throne there. Over here, that's in the early good rendition. And well, unfortunately they have a lot the same. I believe they've made movies at this point for sure. Lots of movies, and Hugh's been in them. So, and they're calling him founder of the Royal Capetians. So now we're changing. We're kind of changing away from the Carolingians, the Carlovingians, the Carolinians. We're kind of just changing away from that empire, aren't we? Because they say he is the son of the Capetian, the Capetian line. So, it looks like he's still a fighter, doesn't it? And we have Rise of the Nation States. That looks like a good one there. Anthony, they're all rising. Yeah, I mean, there's actually a lot of good information just from the lookups here. I don't know. That other map was kind of interesting, wasn't it? I might leave you with that other map just during this, because I thought that map was really clever. A clever map. Was that it? Was that? No, that wasn't it. That wasn't it. Now I lost the map. Oh, crud. We don't have time for this. It's just a book. Come on. There we go. Right, so we're at Louis V. 987. Louis, on his ascension to the throne, neither possessed the good qualities of his father nor the esteem of his people. The contempt to which his restless and turbulent disposition had given rise would have excluded him from the succession, but for the interposition of Hugh Capet, who took him under his protection, to this prince was the care of the king's person confided, while the regency of the kingdom devolved on the Queen Dowager. But Emma, being accused of a criminal connection with Alda Baron, Bishop of Leon, was soon driven from her station with ignominy and disgrace. Ignominy and disgrace. She had recourse to her mother, wife to Otho the Great, who pitied her misfortunes and promised her relief. An army of Germans was preparing to march into France when the death of the young monarch in the 21st year of his age gave a new turn to affairs. He was buried in the church of Saint Corneille at Compiègne, where he had been crowned during his father's life. He had acquired the epithet of fainéant, not from any indolence of disposition or attachment to pleasure, but because his short reign was distinguished by no memorable act. Juvénile qui nihil fecit. So they're saying it was kind of a weak time because, well, he didn't do much. It is believed that his death was owing to poison, administered either at the instigation of his mother, whom he had prosecuted with great cruelty, or else by his wife, Blanche, to whom he was an object of aversion. This princess was daughter to a nobleman of Aquitaine. She had left her husband once to return to her family, which gave rise to reports prejudicial and to them both. It is said by some that Louis made a will by which he bequeathed his kingdom to Hugh Capet, to the exclusion of his uncle Charles, or, according to others, to Queen Blanche, on condition that after his death she should marry Hugh, whom the wishes of the nation at length called to the throne. But it is certain that Adelaide, the wife of Hugh, lived some years after the coronation of her husband. Besides, it is highly improbable that Louis should have rewarded his wife's infidelity by the gift of a crown. Be that as it may, this prince was the last of the Carlovingian kings. And as he died without children, Charles, Duke of Lower-Lorraine, was the lawful heir to the throne, but he had alienated the affections of the French by becoming a vassal of the German crown. In consequence of this conduct, Hugh Capet took possession of the vacant throne, whose descendants have reigned over France without interruption for the long space of 8 centuries. Thus expired the illustrious race of the Carlovingians, who had filled the throne of France for 236 years. It had been divided into 3 branches, who reigned over 3 separate kingdoms, Italy, Germany, and France. It is remarkable that the last monarch of each branch was named Louis. The kings of this family had seldom any fixed residence, but were consequently travelling about on horseback, accompanied by their wives. Charles Martel and Pepin, when not in the field, resided most frequently at Paris. Charlemagne and his son at Aix-la-Chapelle or Thionville. Charles the Bald at Soissons or Compiègne. Charles the Simple at Rheims, and Louis the Stranger at Léon. The only place of strength in his dominions. The fall of the Carlovingian race may chiefly be ascribed to the division of the empire into a number of independent states. United under one head, the very dread of its power would have maintained its importance, but divided into small portions it became impotent, and sunk into a state of insignificance. We have seen as many as 5 princes at a time, of the blood of Charlemagne, wearing the crown. But what princes? Unnatural sons, ambitious brothers, and bad parents, who, intent on mutual destruction, taught their subjects to infringe on the sovereign authority. To infringe on the sovereign authority, which was too feeble to repress their rebellious attempts. Hence the encroachments of the sovereign pontiff, who, considering themselves as entitled to dispose of an empire of which at first they were but subjects, extended an authority merely spiritual over all temporal concerns. Hence, too, that enormous authority assumed by the prelates, who, after dethroning a parent at the solicitation of a child, claimed the right of electing, confirming or deposing their masters. Swayed by ambition, they were better calculated to shine in the field than the pulpit, contemptible from their ignorance, scarcely able to read, much less to write, yet formidable as well from their spiritual thunders as from temporal authority they had usurped over their dioceses and episcopal towns. This gave rise to those principalities, almost independent, which the monks erected, in countries where a few years before they had been employed in the cultivation of a small portion of land. The gift of liberal piety. Hence also those usurpations of the nobles, who insensibly made themselves kings, as it were, of the provinces to which they had been originally appointed in the capacity of governors. Usurpations which were soon converted into hereditary rights, at first tolerated through weakness and the fear of making enemies, and at length by necessity, from want of power to repress them. The domains of Louis, the last of the descendants of Charlemagne, were confined to Léon, Soissons, and a few other districts, his claim to which was disputed. Many a vassal was more opulent and powerful than his master. Hence those dreadful inundations of Normans, which, for the best part of a century, desolated the empire. Thus weakened by division, and who, after establishing a settlement in the heart of France, at length united with her tyrants for annihilating the royal authority. Such were the chief causes of the decline of the house of Charlemagne, which under Pepin possessed all the brilliancy of youth, under Charlemagne all the force and vigour of manhood, and under Louis the Gentle all the weakness of old age. There were but few festivals observed under the second race of kings. The nobles were obliged to attend their celebration in the principal city of the diocese in which they resided. the kings themselves made a point of being present. A list of these festivals may be seen in a famous constitution of Charlemagne, where they are marked in red letters. They were Christmas Day, Saint John of Evangelist, the Innocents, the Octave of Our Lord, New Year's Day, the Epiphany, the Octave of the Epiphany, the Purification of the Blessed Virgin, 8 days after Easter, the Great Litanies, the Ascension, Whit Sunday, Saint John the Baptist, Saint Peter and Saint Paul, Saint Martin and Saint Andrew. Those are all festival days, and that was when a lot of commerce happened. It's when you went to go shopping. The third or Capetian race. Hugh Capet, 987 AD. France, on the death of Louis V, was no longer in that flourishing state in which it was found by Charles the Bald on his ascension to the throne. Each province formed a sovereignty, and there was scarcely a citizen endued with ambition and possessed of power, but aspired to a state of independence. It was still a great kingdom, which extended from the Scheldt and the Meuse to the British Channel, and from the Elbe to the Rhone, but as Mezerai observes, it was rather governed like a large fief than as a monarchy. The power of the king bore a small proportion to the extent of his dominions. Every province had its hereditary counts or dukes, vassals whose power was almost as formidable to their sovereign as that of their neighbouring princes. In order to convey a just idea of the situation of the kingdom at this period, it will be necessary to take a cursory view of its various divisions, and to offer some remarks on the nobles or princes who enjoyed those great fiefs on the succession of Hugh Capet to the throne. So many already thought they were kings of their little places. Flanders, which comprehended all that country which lies between the Scheldt and the sea and the Somme, was then governed by Arnaud, the second of his name. The care of this province had been entrusted by Charlemagne to a count who assumed the title of Forester. Whether it then became a fief of the crown, it is not known, but it is certain that it's one of those books that puts the that on the page and then a double that on the other. It is certain that the successors of that count enjoyed it. Just in case you weren't following. After the feudal manner, from the time of Baldwin, surnamed Bras de Fer, who married Judith, daughter of Charles the Bald. When these nobles thus became proprietors of a province of which originally they were but governors, they introduced sub-infeudations, and by that means acquired vassals, who were bound in the same duties to them as they themselves were to king. Such was the origin of the counts of Guienne, Boulogne, Saint Paul, Thurine, and of the Lord of Montreuil and Lille. The house of Vermandois was equally ancient and powerful. It derived itself from Bernard, King of Italy, its origin, and possessed, besides, the county of Senlis and several districts in the Ile-of-France, a great part of Picardy, all Brie, and nearly the whole Champagne. But its power had experienced considerable diminution from a division of its domains. Robert, youngest son of Herbert III, was the first who took the title of Count of Troyes, Troyes, Troies, we'll say Troy. He was succeeded by his brother Herbert, who left one son named Stephen, and Stephen, dying without issue, appointed Eudes or Odo, grandson to Thibault, and to Lugarde, Princess of Vermandois, as his heir. From him sprang the counts of Champagne, whose posterity enjoyed that province till the reign of Philippe the Fair, who by his marriage with the heiress Joan re-annexed it to the crown. Burgundy had also its dukes, and so early as the time of Charles the Simple, it was governed by Richard the justiciary. It'll be justiciary perhaps. The just probably is Richard the Just, with almost sovereign power. Under Louis the Stranger, it passed into the family of Hugh, Duke of France. At this time it was enjoyed by Henry, on condition of doing homage to his elder brother, Hugh Capet. And several ancient records, it appears, that the extent of this duchy, you could say duchy, if you're uncomfortable with duchy, duchy was nearly the same as it is as present. That part which lies beyond the Saône was divided between different counts, who are celebrated in history, such as those of Maison, Auxonne, and Chalon, who were vassals to Conrad the Pacific, king of Transjorane and Cisjorane. Burgundy, so named from Mount Jura, by which they were separated, that had long been dismembered from the crown of France. The Duchy of France was neither less important from its extent nor less formidable from the number of its vassals. It comprehended, besides its extensive domains, in the Picardy and Champagne, the town and county of Paris, the Orléanois, the Chartrain, Perche, the county of Bras, Touraine, Anjou, and Maine. This vast fief, which had long been enjoyed by the children of Robert the Strong, rendered its possessors more powerful than the sovereigns, whose vassals they were. The custom of the sub-infeudations appeared to be attended with advantages. It was adopted by the Dukes of France, whence arose the counts of Anjou, Blois, Chartres, and Tours. But it is worthy of the remark that these sub-vassals were not classed among the nobles of the kingdom. We read in those annals of Rheims that Thibault le Trichard was excluded from one of the French parliaments because he was not a vassal of the crown, but of Hugh the White of Normandy. So, is he a White of Normandy or what? Yeah, Normandy and Brittany had been ceded to Rollo the Dane. No, it's just Hugh the White, period. We don't know why he was given that name. He had very pale skin. The former as an independent state, which would be Normandy. The second as a fief of the crown, which would be Brittany. They were at present governed by Richard I, brother-in-law to Hugh Capet, who had been brought up at his court. Such was the pride of the Norman princes, that they disdained to consider themselves as vassals of the crown, such their independence that they pretended they were exempt from the obligation of furnishing troops for the king, and such their power that their revenues were infinitely superior to those of their master. We learn from a deed of foundation dated in the reign of Hugh Capet that the Duke of Gascony was still a vassal of the French monarch. That duchy included the whole extent of country between the Garonne and the Dordogne, the Pyrenees and the two seas, except the county of Comminges and Conferrand. William Sancho, who was the 7th hereditary duke, now governed that province. It was some time before the Counts of Thoulouse attained to that degree of power which they enjoyed under the reign of Louis the Stranger. Confined at first to the mere province of Thoulouse, afterwards heirs to the Principality of Languedoc, they annexed to their ancient title the quality of Prince, Duke, and Marquis of Gothia, or Septimania. This family appears to have lost much of its original splendour under the Hugh Capet and Robert. William III, who lived under the last of these monarchs, only took the title of Count of Albi, Cahors, and Thoulouse, but Raymond IV restored it to all its ancient rights and became one of the most powerful vassals of the crown, under the title of Duke of Narbonne. Aquitaine would indisputably have been the most considerable fief in the kingdom, and had it been united under one chief. We have seen with what difficulty it was reduced under Pepin the Short, and by what means it became a powerful kingdom under Louis the Gentle and his children. From the time of Charles the Bald, it was possessed as a duchy by the Counts of Poitiers, and William, surnamed Fier à Bras, governed it in the capacity of a duke on the accession of Hugh Capet. But though he had succeeded to the rights of his ancestors, he had not succeeded to their power. Aquitaine was, at this time, torn by the intestine commotions of its ambitious nobles, who, taking advantage of the general disorder which prevailed in the monarchy, erected separate and almost independent establishments. Such were the Sires of Bourbon and Dukes of Auvergne, the Counts of Bourges, of La Marche, Angoulême, and Périgueux, who all enjoyed their territories as freeholds, with scarcely any marks of feudal dependence. To these times of anarchy, tyranny, and confusion may be traced the origin of that custom, which afterwards became so prevalent among such of the nobles as were neither counts nor dukes, of taking the names of their estates and castles. On reading the ancient authors, we find that formerly none but proper names were used. Under the second race of kings, an epithet was added, as a more evident mark of distinction, and this was either taken from the dignity or strength of the person, from his complexion, or from some personal quality. Hence those names that so frequently occur in history of Hugh the Abbot, Robert the Strong, Hugh the White, Hugh Capet. The epithet given to this last prince is said to be derived from the Latin word capito, which literally means a large head, and figuratively a sensible man. Some, however, affirm that he was thus named from a kind of hat which he first introduced. All right, so now that they've got him, they think maybe he's named after a hat. Others think he's a sensible man, or he just has a big head. All right. Such was the state of France at that time, when the sceptre was transferred from the family of Charlemagne to the illustrious house which still retains it. These numerous dukes and counts were not only accustomed to transmit to their descendants the principalities they possessed, but to have vassals of their own, from whom they received an immediate homage. The new sovereign suffered them quietly to enjoy their usurpations, and entertained no thoughts of disputing their prerogatives. Nothing can tend to better to demonstrate the insignificance of the sovereign authority in these boisterous times than the answer of Aldibert, Count of Périgueux, to Hugh Capet and his son Robert. That nobleman had laid siege to Tours, which belonged to Count Eudes. Count Eudes. And the kings says an ancient author, not daring to have recourse to arms, merely sent to ask him who had made him a count, and pray who made them kings. Replied Aldibert, and with great coolness continued the siege till he had reduced the place. So one said, who had made him a count? And the other said, well, and pray, who made them kings? That's it. So in the present situation of the empire, both courage and address were requisite to remove those impediments which barred the approach of Hugh Capet to the throne. It has been generally asserted that the crown was conferred on him by the general consent of the nation assembled at Noyon. But if credit may be given to a letter discovered by Duchesne, far from having recourse to the authority of a parliament, he effected by force of arms the dissolution of that parliament, which had actually assembled for the purpose of ensuring the succession to Duke Charles. This letter was written to Diederik or Thierry, Bishop of Metz, by the famous Gerbert, who was raised from the dignity of the Canon of Rheims to the archiepiscopal see of that city. From thence translated to that of Ravenna, and finally promoted to the papal throne under the appellation of Sylvester II. These are his words: Duke Hugh has assembled 600 men-at-arms. On the report of his approach, the Parliament, which was then sitting at the palace of Compiègne, separated on the 11th of May. All took to flight: the Duke Charles, the Count Reinchard, and the Princess of Vermandois, and the Bishop of Léon, Aldebaran, who has given his nephew an hostage to Bardos, for the execution of what Siegfried and Godfrey have promised. It must be observed that the Duke of France is here called Bardas, in allusion to what was then passing at Constantinople, where a nobleman of that name had usurped the empire, to the prejudice of the children of his master and benefactor. It was not to a parliament, then, that Hugh Capet was indebted for the crown, but to that by which empires are established and overturned, a fortunate combination of strength and prudence. It is needless to trace the genealogical tree of this prince, or to examine the different opinions with regard to the descent of his ancestor, Robert the Strong. It is sufficient to know that his grandfather had swayed the sceptre of France, and that his father, without the title, had enjoyed the authority of a king. That his birth was illustrious admits not of a doubt, but still it could give him no possible title to the throne, had the rules of succession been observed. Charles must have succeeded his nephew. Hugh, sensible of this, chiefly founded his own pretensions on the baseness of that prince in submitting to become the vassal of a monarch who had formerly been a subject of France. The necessity which induced Charles to the adoption of that measure in order to obtain an establishment which the scanty possessions of his nephew were insufficient to afford him, was totally overlooked. Nothing but the degradation of his family was insisted on, and that operated so powerfully on the minds of the French as to effect his exclusion from the throne. In order to strengthen his claims, Hugh called on the aid of superstition. He caused the report to be propagated that Saint Riquier, a saint then in vogue, had revealed to him that he should be king, as a reward for his piety in having compelled the Count of Flanders to restore his relics, the relics of the saint, in order to deposit them in the abbey which bears his name. When the minds of the people were thus prepared, Hugh, having previously given orders to his principal vassals to be ready to assist him in case of necessity, found himself in a situation to assume the title of king as soon as Louis was dead. Advancing from Noyon, where he then was, to Rheims, with a considerable body of troops, he was there anointed and crowned by Archbishop Adalberon. In 988, Hugh, conscious that his title was defective, hastened to take every step which he thought could confirm his authority. With this view, he convened a parliament in the month of December, subsequent to his coronation, in the city of Orléans, out of reach of his rival and in the midst of his own friends and dependents. There, by the unanimous advice of the assembly, his only son Robert was associated with him in the government, and was accordingly crowned by Séguin, Archbishop of Sens. We have already had occasion to remark that the most valuable ecclesiastical benefice had passed into the hands of noblemen, most of whom were in the army and married men. Hugh himself had inherited from his ancestors the abbeys of Saint-Martin, at Tours, of Saint-Germain-des-Prés, Saint-Denis, and Saint-Riquier, which had fallen to him on the death of his father, Hugh the Great. He now restored them to the monks with the liberty of with the liberty of electing, first time that word is used, the liberty of electing their own abbots in such places as enjoying that privilege according to the ancient canons. This liberality, which was imitated by all the nobles in the kingdom, secured not only immense riches to the clergy, but a degree of authority that became highly formidable to the successors of this prince. It answered, however, the present purpose by procuring him the unanimous votes of the clergy, whose gratitude led them to confirm his usurpation. But the new monarchs were not suffered long to enjoy in tranquillity the dominions they had thus acquired. Charles armed in Lower Lorraine, and with him Arnaud, Count of Flanders, and Herbert, Count of Vermandois, who, being both descended from Charlemagne, determined to support the pretensions of the lawful heir. But unfortunately the first died at this critical conjuncture, and the second, who was father-in-law to Charles, was so much exposed in the vengeance of the two kings that he was afraid to declare himself openly. Charles, however, commenced the campaign, and with a powerful army laid siege to Léon. This place was exceedingly strong, and the garrison, being encouraged by the presence of Queen Emma and the exhortations of Bishop Asselin, an obstinate resistance was expected. But the Duke pressed the siege with such vigour that the town was carried before any succours could arrive. The queen and the prelate were made prisoners, and the obstinacy of the prince in refusing to release them created him many enemies, and the clergy, as much from arrogance as from respect to the reigning family, overwhelmed him with the thunders of the church. These ecclesiastical anathemas were then highly prejudicial, as they declared the object of them to have forfeited all his rights to the throne. But in this instance they were by no means deserved, particularly with regard to the prelate, who, far from complaining of his captivity, was proud to become the minister and favourite of his conqueror. Hugh was sensibly afflicted at the news of the capture of Laon. Was it afflicted or assisted? No, I'm sorry, afflicted. No, he was afflicted of the consequence of which, at the commencement of his reign, he was fully aware. As no time was to be lost, he assembled his vassals and advanced towards the enemy. But the prince defended himself with heroic courage, and making a judicious ally on the besiegers, oh no, it wasn't an ally, a judicious ally on the besiegers, he burnt their quarters, put numbers of them to the sword, and obtained so complete a victory that the whole army was put to flight. And Hugh with difficulty escaped the general carnage. The news of this victory revived the hopes of the friends of the family of Charlemagne. William, Duke of Aquitaine, either from attachment to that illustrious house, or from jealousy at seeing one of his equals become his sovereign, constantly refused to acknowledge the authority of Hugh Capet. In conversation and by letters, he ventured to reproach the French with the violation of their oath, and detesting, to use the words of an ancient writer, the iniquity of those who had attended the assembly at Orleans, he openly declared for the Duke of Lorraine, whose birth, together with the wishes of a numerous body of people, called him to the throne. All right, well, so we have a little bit of misfit there. One wanted to say, hey, you chose him as king, it could have been me. William was saying, maybe it could have been him. And Hugh the whole time is really trying to seek some sort of a protectionism that he really is king. I'm going to take a small break there. Hugh immediately took measures for preventing the progress of this spirit of discontent, and marching to Poitiers, he formed the siege of the city. But here all his efforts proved equally unsuccessful, and his late attempts on the city of Laon. The inhabitants repelled his attacks and defeated him on several skirmishes. At length, being in want of provision, he was compelled to retire, when he was pursued so closely by William that he was obliged to hazard a battle, which was fought near the abbey of Bourgueil. The contest was maintained with great vigour on both sides, and victory was long doubtful. But at length it declared in favour of Hugh, and William, being defeated, was reduced to the necessity of acknowledging his authority. Charles, in the meantime, profiting by this powerful diversion, had made himself master of Soissons and Rheims, but not pursuing the advantage he had thus acquired with sufficient ardour and alacrity. He gave time to Hugh to march to the assistance of Archbishop Adalberon, who refused to give him the royal unction. The prelate's pretence was that he had no right to dispose of the crown. To dispose, it does say that. He had no right to dispose of the crown, which could not be lawfully conferred without the consent of the bishops and nobles, who represented the whole monarchy. He had not suffered this scruple to operate as an impediment to the coronation of the Duke of France, nor would he now have started it, had not the prince been very near to him. In fact, Hugh soon retook the city of Rheims and Adalberon, dying soon after. He bestowed the vacant see on Arnauld, the natural son of Lothair, and consequently nephew to his competitor. The elevation of an enemy to this important post was an instance of short-sighted policy, which he shortly had cause to repent. It is true, he took every precaution in his power to avert the ill effects of his imprudence, to ensure the fidelity of the youthful prelate. He required hostages, and accordingly Bishop Bruno, Gilbert, Count of Russie, Bruno's brother, and Guy, Count of Soissons, their cousin german, were delivered to him. A form of homage was presented and subscribed by Arnauld, by which he swore an inviolable fidelity to the two monarchs. And I've never seen that word before. Inviolable fidelity to the two monarchs, and imprecated the vengeance of heaven on his head if he failed in his duty. He doesn't get it unless he fails. If he fails, then he gets it. By entering into these solemn engagements, he not only secured an archbishopric, valuable from the extent of its revenues, but the temporal dominion of the city, and of some other lands and districts, which the Archbishop of Rheims had seized during the troubles that prevailed under the late reign. He therefore swore an eternal fidelity to Hugh, and made his dependents take a similar oath, though it was no sooner taken than violated. Note, they are saying temporal all the time, meaning they're talking the city as a temporal, they're talking the country as a temporal, they're talking, all the countries taken as a temporal, like a large brain. It's a very interesting way of looking at a government. The Archbishop, unwillingly openly to espouse a cause which he had publicly sworn to abandon, had recourse to stratagem, and by the means of a priest named Aldegard, whom he admitted to his confidence. A body of troops sent by Charles was secretly admitted into the town of Rheims during the night. The principal clergy were immediately seized, and in order to favour the deception, the Archbishop himself was arrested and conducted to Laon, where they affected to treat him as a state prisoner. From thence the thunders of the Church were culminated. Well, no, the thunders of the Church were fulminated. We want to say fulminated, we'll say fulminated, by the artful prelate against all who had been concerned in the plot, and he ordered his suffragans to issue similar anathemas. He was not deceived by his professions, but yielding to circumstances, he courted and effected a reconciliation with Arnoul. But the perfidious priest again violated his promise and fled to Laon. His defection, however, was attended with no bad consequences to the new sovereign. In 991, but the treachery of another prelate, Alcelin, proved fatal to his unhappy rival Charles. Though the favourite of his prince and the depository of his secrets, he had long maintained a epistolary correspondence with Hugh, whom he informed of everything that passed in the councils of this matter, of his master. And the king is known as master. Particularly apprised him with that blind security which prevailed in the city of Laon, which would render it an easy conquest. Hugh gratefully accepted the invitation, and the treachery displayed at Rheims was revived at Laon. The king was admitted by the perfidious prelate into the palace of his benefactor in the night of the Holy Thursday, when he was employed in the devotions appropriate to the day, and Charles and his family were immediately conducted to Senlis, and from thence to the Tower of Orleans, where that prince, who was worthy of a better fate, died after a captivity of 2 years. Okay. Charles left 4 children: Otho, who succeeded him in the Duchy of Lorraine and who died without heir; Louis, who according to some authors founded the family of the Landgrave of Thuringia, but according to others died childless some years before his brother; Hermengarde, wife to Albert, Count of Namur; and Gobege, married to Lambert, Count of Hainaut. Queen Isabelle, wife to Philip Augustus, sprang from the eldest of these princesses, and Landgrave of Hesse are descended from the youngest. From 991 to 995, Archbishop Arnoul had been taken with his uncle and confined in the same prison, but in order to effect his deposition, the king deemed it necessary to convene an ecclesiastical council, which accordingly assembled in the church belonging to the Abbey of Saint Basil, near Rheims. Some of the members wished to refer the decision of this matter to the Pope, but Arnauld, Bishop of Orleans, a prelate distinguished for his knowledge and erudition, proved by various examples from the ecclesiastical history that bishops should be tried on the spot, where it was more easy to obtain the necessary proofs for establishing their guilt. "We believe," said that prelate, "that we should always honor the Church of Rome in memory of St. Peter, and we do not pretend to oppose the decrees of the Sovereign Pontiff when they are conformable to the canons, the authority of which should ever remain in full vigor. If the popes are distinguished for knowledge and virtue, we have nothing to fear from them, and if they are led away by ignorance or passion, they are still less to be dreaded." The bishop then entered into a detail of the calamities produced by the See of Rome, and of the unworthiness of several of its pontiffs. He represented John XII, surnamed Octavian, as a man addicted to the lowest kind of debauchery, and of having excited a spirit of sedition that filled Rome with the assassinations and carnage. Boniface VII he painted as a monster, stained with the blood of his predecessor, and in short, as the worst. He was the worst of men. "If it be affirmed," said he, "that the Church of Rome should judge every other's church, and be exempt from judgment itself, let a pope then be chosen whose sentences will not need reformation. We respect the Church of Rome, we consult it. If its judgment be just, we receive it in peace. If it be otherwise, we will follow the advice of the apostle, not to listen even to an angel against the gospel. If Rome be silent as at present, we will consult the laws." The bishops and the king himself had in fact written to Pope John XV on the subject, but had received no answer. The council therefore proceeded to the trial of Arnauld, probably called Arnauld or Arnauld with an L. The priest who opened the gates of Rheims betrayed his trust, and acknowledged the orders he had received from the archbishop. That prelate was accordingly condemned, though with reluctance by a decree of the council and the favourable inclinations of the precedent. The Archbishop of Sens, and of several other members towards him. So he's saying, he's not saying precedents, he's saying president. So this is another time I'm seeing this word listed for the first time, to say president. And of several other members towards him were rendered ineffectual by a voluntary subscription to his own confession and degradation. The vacancy was bestowed on Gabin, formerly a monk of Aurillac. I'm saying C all the time, and you know what, it probably is Fee, but I'm still saying C. It has a little bit more poetic quality. But yeah, it can be read either. actually. When you think of the See of Rome, you think of all the patrons of Rome, the See of religion, the fee of Rome, all the patrons have to pay. But in retrospect, most of the time they're using it like a huge cloud, the sea, like it's a massive cloud covering the cities. So the See of the vacant see was a voluntary subscription to his own confession and degradation. I'm sorry, the vacant see was bestowed on Gaubert, formerly a monk of Aurillac, and afterwards preceptor to the Emperor Otho III, a man celebrated in those days of ignorance for his learning. But the court of Rome resented with indignation the proceedings which had been adopted without her concurrence. The Pope dispatched a legate into France, who was commissioned to revise the sentence. A second council was holden at Rheims, and the papal power was gratified by the deposition of Gaubert and the restoration of Arnoul. Gaubert, however, insisted on the illegality of the sentence and wrote several letters to the Pope, whose interference he maintained was an attack on the rights of the kingdom, on the episcopal dignity, and on the king himself. If, said he, the Bishop of Rome, it is an F that I can't read very well. If, said he, the Bishop of Rome sin against his brother, and after repeated remonstrances should refuse obedience to the church, he should be regarded as a publican, a publican. I don't know what a publican is right now. The higher the rank, the more dangerous the fall. I have a feeling it's not a good thing. It's probably put in the general square and thrown stones at or something. The higher the rank, the more dangerous the fall. The saying of St. Gregory, that the flock ought to respect the sentence of the pastor, whether just or unjust, cannot be applied to bishops. For bishops are not the flock, but the leaders of the flock. We must not give our enemies an opportunity of saying that the whole priesthood should be so far submissive to an individual that he suffer himself to be corrupted by money, favour, fear, or ignorance. No man can be a bishop without insinuating himself into good graces by similar means. The common law of the Church consists of sacred writings, the canons, and the decrees of the Holy See, when conformable to those. This dispute in 996 with the Pope was the last event worthy of notice in the reign of Hugh Capet, who died the year after the dissolution of the Second Council of Rheims, in the 55th year of his age, and the 10th of his reign. He is said to have married Blanche, widow of Louis, the last king of the blood of Charlemagne. By her he had no children, but by Adelaide, daughter, as it is supposed, of William III, Duke of Guyenne, he had Robert, whom he had associated with him in the empire. Hadewig, married to Regnier IV, Count of Hainaut. Adelaide, who époused Regnault I, Count of Nevers, and Giselle, wife to Hugh I, Count of Ponthieu. A mistaken principle of delicacy, founded on respect to the reigning family, has induced the generality of the French historians to sink the usurpation of Hugh Capet and to exaggerate his virtues, as if the former could invalidate the title or the latter enhance the reputation of his descendants. Even the Abbé Vallet, the Abbé Vallet, whose spirit and good sense mostly rise superior to the little arts of adulation, and lead him to exert the dignified privilege of a historian, to enforce truth without regard to rank, has in this instance condescended to sanction, by his authority, the general prejudice, though he scorns to deviate from veracity, yet has he deigned to palliate a fact by observing that in that age Hugh was perhaps considered as a usurper, that his accession to the throne of France was stamped with the most glaring and indelible marks of usurpation. Who is there will dare to deny? To the crown he could have no possible claim by descent, and with regard to election he dissolved by force that Parliament which had met for the purpose of conferring it on the lawful heir. Hugh Capet was therefore a usurper in every sense of the word, but that he swayed the sceptre he had thus acquired with dignity, justice, and moderation is equally certain. From the moment he associated his son to the regal authority, he abstained himself from the use of the ensigns of royalty, and, as a modern writer has justly observed, if some praise be due to the greatness of mind which scorned the pageantry of power, more will always be ascribed to the clemency of a prince who transferred to his family a crown unstained with blood, and who, in an age of violence, preserved the reputation of unblemished humanity. The high idea which has ever been entertained of the wisdom of Hugh Capet has led some modern writers to make him the author of various establishments, which owe their origin to the mutual consent of the sovereign and his subjects. Such is the custom by which the younger sons of the crown are excluded from partaking in the succession. Such also is that which excludes natural children, even in defect of lawful heirs. As an example of the first we have seen in the person of Lothaire, who left no part of his dominions to his youngest son Charles, and the second had become a law under the second race of kings, during whose reigns no bastard succeeded to the throne. The Emperor Arnul may indeed be cited as an exception, but he was rather indebted to force and usurpation for the imperial dignity than to any right of succession. Hugh then did no more than comply with the established custom by excluding his natural son, Gaucelin, who was abbot of Fleury and archbishop of Bourg, from any share in the kingdom. So all this discrepancy of the king not being in the line and back to the bastard. The institution of the peerage has likewise been ascribed to him. Oh my gosh, I've gone on way too long. Okay, well this one I'll stop.